Growing up, I always had a passion that seemed silly to everyone else. While kids my age were out playing sports or joining clubs, I was glued to my little craft table in the corner of my bedroom. I loved making things, small trinkets, handmade jewelry, quirky little designs that I thought were beautiful. To me, it wasn't just a pastime. It was a way of expressing myself when words felt inadequate. But to my family, especially my cousins and classmates, it was nothing more than a useless hobby. They laughed when I showed them my creations, calling them childish. Teachers told me to focus on real skills. My parents nudged me toward accounting or nursing, and friends smirked whenever I mentioned my dream. That constant dismissal planted a seed of determination inside me. At family gatherings, I'd eagerly bring along something I had crafted, hoping to hear even the slightest word of encouragement. Instead, my relatives chuckled, whispering behind their glasses of wine about how Emily is wasting her time. My sister once muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe she'll finally realize hobbies don't pay bills." I laughed it off on the outside, but inside, each comment pierced me like a blade. I wanted so badly for them to see my vision, to believe in the potential I knew was there. But year after year, their words only grew harsher. The older I became, the more relentless the pressure was to grow up and abandon the dream I clung to. They thought their ridicule would break me. Instead, it became the very fuel I needed. High school was even worse. Whenever I wore jewelry I had made myself, classmates snickered, asking sarcastically if I bought it at the dollar store. Once, during a career day presentation, when I nervously shared that I wanted to turn crafting into a business, the entire room erupted in laughter, including the teacher. "That's sweet, Emily," she said condescendingly. "But maybe pick something more realistic." I'll remember sitting there, cheeks burning, forcing a smile while my heart shattered. That was the first time I truly understood how lonely it was to have a dream no one believed in. I stopped sharing my creations publicly for a while, keeping them hidden in shoeboxes under my bed. But late at night, when everyone else slept, I continued working, each piece whispering promises of a future. College brought new challenges. I enrolled in a business administration program to appease my parents, but my heart wasn't in it. While others joined study groups and prepared for internships, I found myself sketching designs in the margins of my notebooks. I spent hours scrolling through online forums, admiring small business owners who had turned crafts into real companies. It felt like staring into a world just out of reach, one my parents insisted I could never enter. When I showed my roommate a pair of earrings I had made, she chuckled, saying, "Cute, but who would actually buy these?" That sting stayed with me, every dismissive word layered onto the growing mountain of doubt. Yet under that weight, a fire simmered. I didn't know how, but someday I swore I'd prove them wrong. Graduation was supposed to feel like an accomplishment, but instead it felt like defeat. I had the degree my parents wanted, but no job offers that excited me. I worked at a local cafe, wiping tables and serving lattes, listening to customers brag about careers I didn't envy. At night, I still crafted, more out of compulsion than hope. My parents scolded me constantly. "You wasted 4 years, and now you're wasting more time on beads and glue." Their words echoed louder than the cafe's clinking dishes. Friends stopped inviting me to hangouts because they said I was always busy with that nonsense. Alone in my small apartment, I looked at the piles of materials around me and wondered if maybe they were right. But then, I'd create something beautiful, and doubt melted away. The turning point came unexpectedly. A regular customer at the cafe noticed the necklace I was wearing, one I had made the night before. She leaned over the counter, eyes sparkling, and asked, "Where did you buy that? It's gorgeous." For a second, I froze, unsure whether to admit it was mine, but something inside me whispered to be brave. I made it, I confessed quietly. Her reaction stunned me. She insisted I make one for her and even offered to pay double what I thought it was worth. That single moment cracked open a door I thought was forever closed. When she wore it to work, 3 of her coworkers placed orders the very next day. For the first time in years, I felt validated. My so-called useless hobby had value after all. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Within weeks, I was taking custom orders from strangers who had seen my work through mutual connections. Every sale was small, $20 here, $30 there, but each one felt monumental. I set up a tiny online shop, awkwardly photographing my creations on the windowsill of my apartment. My parents rolled their eyes when I told them, warning me not to waste money on a fantasy. My sister sneered, calling it a side hustle that will die in a month. But the orders kept coming. Slowly, my evenings transformed from lonely crafting sessions into nights filled with packaging jewelry, printing shipping labels, and rushing to the post office before it closed. I wasn't making millions, not yet, but for the first time, I had undeniable proof of possibility. The ridicule didn't stop, but my perspective shifted. Every mocking comment became fuel. When my parents complained that I spent too much time on beads, I reminded myself they couldn't see the invoices piling up in my inbox. When my sister laughed that I was still playing dress-up, I thought of the glowing reviews from customers who felt beautiful wearing my designs. I wasn't just making jewelry anymore. I was building something real. Nights were exhausting, balancing cafe shifts with my growing business, but exhaustion felt better than despair. For the first time, I had a purpose that lit me up inside. Each package I mailed out carried not just jewelry, but pieces of my soul. And with every order, my confidence grew. The girl they mocked was becoming unstoppable. But success, even in its infancy, made me cautious. I still heard their voices in my head, telling me it was temporary, that one day the orders would stop and I'd be left embarrassed. So I worked harder, doubling down on marketing, learning everything I could about online businesses. I devoured articles, watched tutorials, and taught myself skills that business school had never covered. I wasn't just creating jewelry anymore. I was creating a brand. My apartment looked like a chaotic warehouse, supplies stacked on every surface, but to me, it was paradise. Every night, as I sealed boxes and scribbled thank you notes, I whispered to myself, keep going, because deep down, I knew something big was coming. And when it did, the same people who laughed at me would choke on their words. Still, fear lingered in the background. What if they were right? What if this momentum fizzled out and left me humiliated? The thought gnawed at me every time I faced a slow week of orders. But each time doubt threatened to consume me, something miraculous happened. A new customer, a glowing review, an unexpected sale. Slowly, I began to realize that success wasn't just luck. It was persistence, resilience, and belief in myself when no one else believed. My so-called useless hobby was no longer just a secret passion. It was becoming my escape route, my rebellion, my revenge. I wasn't ready to declare victory yet, but for the first time, I could see the path forming ahead, and I promised myself I wouldn't stop until I reached the summit. The real test came when I decided to take a leap of faith. My online shop had steady orders, but it wasn't enough to quit the cafe. One night, after another grueling double shift, Daniel, my boyfriend at the time, looked at me and said, "Emily, if you put as much effort into your business as you do wiping tables, you'd triple your income." His words stuck with me. For days, I wrestled with the idea, what if I failed? What if everyone was right and this was just a phase? But another part of me whispered louder, what if they were wrong? What if this was my chance? Finally, with trembling hands, I submitted my resignation. My parents called me insane. My sister rolled her eyes, but inside I felt more alive than ever. At first, quitting the cafe terrified me. I had no stable paycheck, no safety net, just a dream and a pile of supplies. The first month was brutal. Some weeks, I barely made enough to cover rent. I lived on ramen noodles and instant coffee, stretching every dollar like elastic. But I also worked harder than ever before. I revamped my website, polished product photos, and learned how to run social media ads. I wasn't just creating jewelry anymore. I was building a company. My family mocked me relentlessly, calling me irresponsible, even lazy, for refusing a real job. But every new sale silenced their words just a little more. Each package I mailed wasn't just jewelry. It was proof that I was clawing my way out of doubt and into destiny. Momentum came slowly, but when it came, it hit like a tidal wave. One day, an influencer stumbled across my page and bought a necklace. She posted about it on Instagram, tagging my shop. Overnight, my inbox exploded. Hundreds of orders poured in, more than I could have imagined. I stayed up 3 nights in a row, fulfilling them, cutting ribbon until my fingers blistered, printing shipping labels until my printer groaned. Exhaustion blurred my vision, but adrenaline kept me going. My parents still doubted me, dismissing it as a fluke, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't luck, it was preparation meeting opportunity. I had worked for this moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the empire I could build. The influx of orders forced me to think bigger. My little apartment couldn't handle the chaos. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, bubble wrap covering the floor, supplies spilling out of closets. Daniel suggested I rent a small studio space, and though fear screamed at me, I took the plunge. Signing that lease felt monumental. It wasn't just a workspace, it was a declaration. Every time I unlocked the door, I reminded myself that this wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a business. Slowly, I hired part-time help, friends who needed extra cash and believed in my vision. For the first time, I wasn't working alone. I was leading something real. The same hands they once mocked for threading beads were now building a foundation strong enough to support my future. Of course, Melissa, my sister, couldn't resist making her opinions known. She visited the studio one afternoon, arms crossed, smirking at the mess of supplies. "This is it?" she sneered. "You gave up a career for glitter and string?" I smiled politely, hiding the fire inside me. I didn't bother explaining that my revenue was already surpassing entry-level salaries. I didn't tell her about the growing waitlist of customers or the fact that I had doubled my rent in profits. Instead, I let her laugh, because I knew one day her laughter would turn to silence. Her words no longer cut me, they fueled me. Every sneer, every mocking tone became gasoline on the fire I was building. And deep down, I couldn't wait for the day she realized just how wrong she had been. As the months passed, sales skyrocketed. I began experimenting with designs, branching out from simple necklaces to collections that told stories. Customers weren't just buying jewelry, they were buying meaning, pieces that represented milestones in their lives. Testimonials poured in, brides wearing my designs on their wedding days, graduates celebrating achievements, mothers gifting daughters tokens of love. Each story filled me with pride, and slowly, the world that once dismissed me began to pay attention. My shop was featured in a small local magazine, then another. Suddenly, people who once mocked me were forwarding the articles to each other, their laughter replaced by whispers of shock. I had gone from the girl with a useless hobby to a name people recognized. And the best part? I was only just beginning. But success came with pressure. Orders sometimes overwhelmed me, and mistakes slipped through. A delayed shipment, a broken clasp, an email unanswered too long. Small issues snowballed quickly. Negative reviews stung like knives, and for a moment, I felt the old doubts creeping back. What if everyone had been right? What if I wasn't cut out for this? But then I remembered why I started. I wasn't doing this just to make money. I was doing it to prove to myself that I could. So I swallowed my pride, apologized sincerely, and fixed every problem I could. Each setback became a lesson, sharpening my skills, making me stronger. I wasn't afraid of failing anymore. I was afraid of stopping, and that fear kept me pushing forward even when exhaustion screamed at me to quit. Daniel became my rock through it all. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of how far I'd come. "Remember when you thought you'd never sell a single necklace?" he teased, holding up shipping receipts that stacked higher than our kitchen counter. His belief in me was a lifeline, stronger than the mocking voices of my family. He reminded me that success wasn't a straight climb. It was a battlefield, and I was winning. Together, we dreamed bigger, sketching out plans for expansion, imagining a future where my brand wasn't just a small shop, but a household name. Each night, I fell asleep exhausted, but with a heart full of determination. My so-called useless hobby had already taken me further than I had ever imagined, and still, the best was yet to come. The tipping point arrived when a national retailer reached out, offering to stock my designs in select stores. I almost dropped my phone while reading the email. Me, the girl mocked for wasting time on beads, was being courted by a multi-million-dollar company. I spent days negotiating, terrified I'd make a mistake, but Daniel helped me prepare. When the contract was signed, I cried in disbelief. My first shipment to their warehouses was enormous, requiring pallets and delivery trucks. As I watched the boxes leave my studio, I realized I wasn't just running a business anymore. I was building an empire. And while my parents still muttered doubts, I noticed their voices softening. Even they couldn't ignore the growing success. Melissa, however, stayed silent. And I knew that silence meant only one thing: envy. I'll never forget the first time I walked into a store and saw my designs displayed under bright lights, tags with my brand name gleaming proudly. I stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my cheeks, while strangers browsed casually, not knowing the years of ridicule behind those pieces. That moment was everything. All the nights of doubt, all the laughter I had endured crystallized into pure victory. I snapped a photo, sent it to my parents, and waited. Hours later, my mom called, her voice trembling. "Emily, we're proud of you." For the first time, those words felt real. They weren't just lip service. They were an acknowledgement of what I had built. And as I hung up, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." Because it truly was. Seeing my work in stores was surreal, but it also ignited a hunger I didn't know I had. I wanted more, not just shelves in a few locations, but my brand in every city, every household. Expansion meant scaling up, and scaling up meant risk. I invested everything back into the business, hiring a small team, upgrading equipment, and renting a larger workspace. For the first time, I had employees relying on me, and that responsibility both thrilled and terrified me. Melissa mocked me again, muttering that I was playing CEO. But what she didn't realize was that every payroll I signed, every box that left my studio, was proof that I wasn't playing. I was leading. I wasn't just proving her wrong. I was proving to myself that I was unstoppable. With growth came exposure. A business journalist reached out, intrigued by my story of turning a ridiculed hobby into a legitimate company. At first, I hesitated. What if sharing my journey made me look foolish again? But Daniel encouraged me, reminding me that authenticity was my strength. The article was published online, and within days, it went viral. Thousands of readers resonated with the idea of being underestimated and rising above it. Orders skyrocketed. And emails flooded in from people thanking me for inspiring them to chase their own useless passions. For the first time, my pain had become a source of power, not shame. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been doubted. And in their messages, I found a deeper purpose for what I was building. The recognition didn't stop there. Television producers contacted me for a morning show segment, showcasing small businesses that had defied expectations. I stood under bright studio lights, heart racing as I shared how my family once laughed at my craft table. When the host asked how I felt now, I smiled and said, "Every laugh became my motivation." The audience applauded, and I felt years of humiliation melt away. After the broadcast, my online store nearly crashed from the surge of visitors. Retailers who had once ignored me now begged to stock my designs. Investors reached out with offers, but I turned most of them down. I didn't want to sell out. This business wasn't just profit. It was my revenge, my redemption, my story carved in gold. And I wasn't finished yet. Melissa's silence grew louder with every headline. At family gatherings, she avoided eye contact, fiddling with her phone, while others congratulated me. Relatives who once ridiculed me now bragged about being related to Emily Carter, the jewelry entrepreneur. The hypocrisy was laughable, but I didn't waste energy resenting them. I had outgrown their opinions. My focus was on the women writing to me daily, thanking me for giving them courage. One message in particular struck me. Because of you, I finally quit my toxic job to pursue my art. That was when I realized my business had evolved beyond jewelry. It had become a movement. Every piece I created carried a message that passion has value, that no dream is too small, and that revenge is best served with glittering success. The more success I tasted, the more Melissa tried to undermine me in subtle ways. She spread rumors that Daniel was the real brains behind the business, claiming I was just a pretty face for marketing. At first, her words stung, but then I remembered. People who feel irrelevant always cling to lies. I didn't bother defending myself. My results spoke louder than any rumor. When Forbes featured me in their top 30 under 30 list for entrepreneurship, Melissa's gossip vanished overnight. The look on her face when my name was announced at a family dinner was priceless. Her smirk evaporated, replaced by a tight, forced smile. For years, she had been the golden child, but now the spotlight was mine. And the best part? I didn't need to fight for it anymore. By then, revenue had soared into the millions. I opened my first flagship boutique in the heart of the city, a sleek, modern space that embodied my brand's spirit. On opening day, lines wrapped around the block, customers eager to see the collections in person. I stood at the entrance, greeting them with gratitude, remembering the girl who once hid her creations in shoeboxes. That girl would never have believed this moment was possible. My parents attended too, finally beaming with pride, their earlier skepticism replaced by awe. "We were wrong," my father admitted quietly. His words felt like healing after years of wounds. For once, their pride didn't feel conditional. It felt earned. And as the boutique filled with laughter and excitement, I realized I had finally rewritten the narrative they once controlled. Running a boutique wasn't easy. Every decision, from decor to staff uniforms, carried weight. But the challenge energized me. I poured my soul into creating an experience, not just a store. Customers left with more than jewelry. They left with stories, memories, and inspiration. Local press raved, and soon tourists visited as though it were a landmark. I stood in the back one evening, watching strangers admire pieces I had once been ridiculed for making. Tears stung my eyes. Revenge wasn't about Melissa anymore. It was about every person in that room who saw value in something others dismissed. It was about every dreamer told their passion was worthless. And in that moment, I realized my true victory, transforming humiliation into empowerment, not just for me, but for everyone who walked through my doors. Despite my success, Melissa couldn't resist one last attempt to belittle me. She cornered me during a holiday party, sneering that jewelry was just fashion and not a real contribution to society. I looked at her calmly and replied, "Tell that to the hundreds of women who've told me my work gave them confidence." For once, she had no response. Her power over me was gone, stripped away by the undeniable reality of my achievements. That night, I didn't feel angry. I felt free. Melissa's opinion no longer mattered. I had spent years craving her approval, but now her voice was just background noise. My success had silenced her louder than any argument could. And in that silence, I found the sweetest revenge of all: peace. As the years passed, my brand continued to grow. I expanded into new product lines, collaborated with well-known designers, and built a loyal following that stretched across the globe. Financially, I was thriving. But the real wealth came from something deeper: the knowledge that I had proven every doubter wrong. The girl mocked for her useless hobby had become a multi-millionaire entrepreneur, not by luck, but by relentless determination. I often thought back to those nights alone in my apartment, wondering if I should quit. I was grateful I hadn't, because now, every time I walked into my boutique or scrolled through glowing reviews, I knew I had built something indestructible, something no mockery could erase. My hobby wasn't useless. It was the foundation of my empire. Looking back, I realized revenge had carried me further than I ever imagined, but along the way, it transformed. What started as a fire to prove others wrong became a beacon to prove myself right. Success wasn't just about silencing Melissa, my parents, or the classmates who laughed at me. It was about reclaiming my voice, my confidence, and my dreams. Revenge gave me strength, but resilience gave me victory. Today, when I hold one of my designs in my hands, I see more than beads and metal. I see years of tears, determination, and triumph. And I know without a doubt that the best stories are born from the hardest battles. My so-called useless hobby had become my greatest weapon, and with it, I had built a life worth celebrating. With every new milestone, I found myself stepping further away from the timid girl who once hid her creations out of shame. Success had reshaped me, but it also humbled me. I remembered what it felt like to be mocked, dismissed, and belittled, so I made it my mission to lift others up. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially women told their dreams were impractical. Watching their eyes light up as I encouraged them felt like rewriting history, giving others the support I had craved. Meanwhile, Melissa seemed to shrink in every room we shared, her former arrogance replaced with quiet resentment. She couldn't stand that the girl she once ridiculed had become a role model. And honestly, that was part of the sweetest revenge. Thriving so loudly her silence became deafening. My brand continued expanding, moving into accessories and lifestyle products. Each launch was met with overwhelming support, and my revenue climbed higher than I had once dared to imagine. Still, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about impact. I began partnering with charities, donating a portion of profits to causes close to my heart. Every donation letter I received reminded me of why I kept pushing. The girl mocked for wasting time with beads was now funding scholarships and supporting shelters. My parents, once my harshest critics, finally admitted they had been wrong. "You taught us never to underestimate passion," my mother confessed one evening. Hearing that felt like closure. But Melissa, she couldn't bring herself to say a word, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Silence was her confession. The boutique thrived, but online sales remained the backbone of my empire. One evening, while reviewing analytics, I realized I had sold to every state in the US, something that made me burst into tears. My little craft table hobby had reached coast to coast. Daniel hugged me tightly, whispering, "And this is only the beginning." He was right. Soon after, international orders started pouring in. Customers from Europe, Asia, and Australia proudly shared photos wearing my designs. I scrolled through each tag, heart swelling. The girl mocked for wasting time was now global. Melissa, once smug about her corporate job, could barely look me in the eye at family dinners. She had mocked me for dreaming too big, and now she mocked me in silence for achieving more than she ever would. Despite everything, there were still moments of vulnerability. Late at night, I sometimes lay awake, haunted by echoes of laughter from the past. The teacher who mocked me during career day. The friends who told me no one would buy my jewelry. My sister sneering in my studio, calling me a failure. Those voices had once felt so powerful. But now, when they crept in, I reminded myself of the reality. I had built an empire from nothing but grit and resilience. Each sneer had been turned into fuel, each insult into bricks of my foundation. And when doubt whispered, I silenced it by walking through my boutique, running my fingers over displays filled with pieces once ridiculed. My so-called useless hobby had become undeniable proof of my strength, and nothing erased that. As my empire grew, so did the spotlight. I was invited to speak at conferences, sharing my story with aspiring entrepreneurs. Standing on those stages, facing hundreds of people, I often thought of the girl sitting in the back of the classroom years ago, cheeks burning from laughter. If only she could see me now, microphone in hand, applause echoing through the room. I told my audiences the truth, that success wasn't easy, that mockery would always sting. But that resilience mattered more than approval. The feedback was overwhelming. People thanked me for giving them courage to chase passions others mocked. And in those moments, I realized revenge had become something greater. It wasn't just about silencing my doubters anymore. It was about amplifying voices that had been silenced by doubt. Melissa's envy reached a breaking point one Thanksgiving dinner. While relatives congratulated me on another magazine feature, she snapped, "She just got lucky. Anyone can sell jewelry if the right influencer posts about it." The room went silent. For years, I would have shrunk under her words. But this time, I laughed. Calmly, I replied, "Luck doesn't keep a business alive for years. Hard work does." Relatives nodded in agreement, and for the first time, Melissa looked small. That moment was liberating. I no longer needed to defend myself, but I chose to. Not for her approval, but for my own pride. Her words no longer defined me. They revealed her bitterness. And seeing her stripped of power in front of the family was sweeter than any victory I could have imagined. By then, Daniel had proposed, and we planned our wedding with the same resilience that fueled my business. I designed my own jewelry for the ceremony, pieces that represented triumph and transformation. Walking down the aisle wearing the very creations once mocked felt like the ultimate statement. Guests whispered about the beauty of the designs, and I smiled, remembering the girl in high school mocked for her dollar store necklaces. Now, those same hands had crafted pieces worth thousands. Melissa attended, sulking in the corner, unable to celebrate me. But I didn't care. This day wasn't about her. It was about love, survival, and proving that I had risen beyond her reach. My wedding wasn't just personal happiness. It was the ultimate stage where every laugh I endured turned into applause. Married life only strengthened my empire. Daniel became more than my partner. He became my biggest cheerleader, reminding me daily of how far I've come. Together, we brainstormed new expansions, dreaming bigger than ever. Soon, I opened additional boutiques in major cities, each grand opening celebrated by crowds that wrapped around the block. My designs graced fashion shows, worn by models strutting confidently across runways. Each flash of the camera felt like a slap back at every person who once doubted me. Melissa, meanwhile, had faded into irrelevance. Her attempts to belittle me became whispers no one cared to hear. And that was the ultimate revenge. Her voice no longer carried weight, not even in our family. Mine was the voice people wanted, and it resonated louder than I ever dreamed. The empire grew into a multi-million-dollar business, but more importantly, it became a symbol. Customers didn't just buy jewelry. They bought empowerment, a reminder that passion mattered. I started a scholarship program for young creators mocked for their unrealistic dreams. Each recipient reminded me of my younger self, and giving them support healed me in ways success alone couldn't. When I announced the program publicly, messages flooded in. People weren't just cheering for my business, they were cheering for the message it carried. And in that support, I found closure. Revenge wasn't just about Melissa or my parents anymore. It was about rewriting the narrative for every dreamer told to quit. My so-called useless hobby had become a beacon, shining far brighter than I ever imagined, and illuminating paths for countless others. Looking back, I realized something extraordinary. The greatest revenge wasn't money, recognition, or headlines. It was freedom. Freedom from doubt, freedom from ridicule, freedom from needing anyone's approval. My journey had started with humiliation, but it ended with empowerment. Every sneer, every laugh, every cruel word had propelled me here. Melissa's voice, once so loud, was now drowned out by the roar of my success. And as I stood in one of my boutiques, watching customers admire the designs I once created in secret, I whispered to myself, "You did it." The girl mocked for wasting time had built an empire. And that empire wasn't just about jewelry. It was about resilience, revenge, and rewriting the story. My useless hobby wasn't useless at all. It was the foundation of my destiny. As my business flourished, I started receiving invitations to speak at universities. Standing in lecture halls filled with students reminded me of my own college days, when professors and classmates dismissed my dreams. I shared the story of being laughed at for wanting to turn crafting into a career, and I could see the spark ignite in the eyes of students who had been told the same. If someone mocks your passion, let that be your motivation, I told them. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most were the students who stayed afterward, thanking me for giving them hope. Every handshake felt like rewriting my past. I wasn't just proving my family wrong anymore. I was proving to an entire generation that dreams labeled useless could change the world. By now, Melissa had almost disappeared from my orbit. Whenever we crossed paths at family events, she barely acknowledged me, her bitterness simmering just beneath the surface. But one evening, she finally broke her silence. "You think you're better than everyone because you sell necklaces," she spat. I looked at her calmly, no longer shaken by her venom. "I don't think I'm better," I said softly. "I just refuse to stay small." Her face flushed with rage, but she had no comeback. For years, her words had chained me, but now they barely grazed me. Her resentment wasn't my burden anymore. It was hers. And in that moment, I realized revenge wasn't about defeating her. It was about living so fully that her attempts to diminish me no longer mattered at all. Daniel and I eventually decided to buy a home, a sprawling place with enough room for family gatherings and future dreams. When relatives visited, they marveled at what I had achieved, suddenly eager to align themselves with me. The same people who once smirked at my craft table now gushed about how they always knew I'd succeed. Their hypocrisy no longer stung, it amused me. Because deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't believed in me. They had doubted me, ridiculed me, and tried to push me into abandoning my passion. My success forced them to rewrite their memories. But I didn't need their approval anymore. My life, my home, my empire spoke louder than their shallow words ever could, and in their awkward praise, I found the sweetest revenge. The business's success eventually caught the attention of investors who had once ignored my proposals. They begged to buy stakes, but I declined. This wasn't just a company, it was my life's proof that resilience conquers ridicule. Selling it would feel like selling my story. Instead, I chose partnerships that aligned with my values, ensuring the brand stayed authentic. My designs expanded into global campaigns, featured in glossy magazines and adored by celebrities. Each headline felt surreal, but also deeply personal. I remembered the sting of laughter, the burn of humiliation, and I smiled, because those very moments had built the woman I had become. My empire wasn't just built on jewelry. It was built on every insult, every doubt, every cruel word. And transforming that pain into power was my ultimate victory. One of my proudest moments came when I hired my first full-time staff, offering salaries and benefits. Providing stability for others felt more rewarding than any paycheck I'd ever received. These employees weren't just workers. They were dreamers like me, people who had once been overlooked. Together, we created a culture of encouragement where no one's ideas were mocked or dismissed. Watching them thrive reminded me of how different my life could have been if someone had supported me earlier. In creating this environment, I wasn't just building a business, I was breaking a cycle. Melissa might never understand the power of uplifting others, but I did. And knowing that my empire wasn't just profitable, but impactful, filled me with a satisfaction deeper than revenge. It felt like healing, one paycheck at a time. The irony wasn't lost on me when my parents began bragging about me at every opportunity. "Our daughter runs a multi-million-dollar company," they boasted, conveniently forgetting the years they told me to abandon my hobby. I didn't hold it against them anymore. They had grown up believing stability mattered more than dreams, and in their way, they thought they were protecting me. But now, they finally understood that passion could be profitable. Their pride, though belated, warmed me. It wasn't validation I craved anymore. It was connection. And slowly, we rebuilt ours. Melissa, however, remained distant, her envy too heavy to release. That was her choice. I had chosen growth, and she had chosen resentment. And standing in the life I had built, I knew I had made the better choice. Years later, when a documentary filmmaker asked to feature my story, I hesitated. Reliving the pain of being mocked felt daunting. But I agreed, hoping it might inspire others. Filming was emotional. I revisited my old apartment, my cafe job, even the craft table where it all began. Seeing those places reminded me of the girl who refused to quit, even when everyone laughed. When the documentary aired, messages poured in from around the world. Viewers shared how my journey encouraged them to keep going despite ridicule. That was when I fully understood the power of storytelling. My revenge had outgrown Melissa, my parents, my classmates. It had become universal. And in sharing it, I wasn't just celebrating success. I was offering proof that no passion is ever truly useless. Melissa eventually confronted me one last time, her voice trembling with resentment. "You built all this just to spite me, didn't you?" she accused. I looked at her with compassion I hadn't felt before. "No," I replied. "I built this because I believed in myself when no one else did. You were just part of the noise." She flinched, as though my calmness hurt more than any insult could. That was the final nail in the coffin of her power over me. She stormed away. But I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. Because I finally understood that my greatest revenge wasn't making her miserable. It was showing her, without words, that she had never truly mattered in the equation. My success was mine alone, untouched by her bitterness. The years rolled on, and my empire solidified. I traveled the world, met incredible people, and continued growing my brand. Every new milestone reminded me of how far I'd come from that craft table. Sometimes I'd look at my old designs tucked away in boxes and smile at how humble it all began. Melissa faded completely from my life, her bitterness consuming her while I thrived. And I realized something profound. Revenge had been my spark, but love and purpose had become my fuel. My empire wasn't about proving others wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. And in that shift, I found true freedom. The girl mocked for her useless hobby had become a woman who built not just wealth, but impact. And that was the victory that lasted. So here's what I'll leave you with. Never let someone else's laughter define your future. They mocked my passion, told me it was a waste of time, and laughed at every stumble. But I turned their cruelty into fuel, and that fuel built an empire. Revenge may have started my journey, but resilience carried me across the finish line. If you've ever been underestimated, take my story as proof. Your useless dream could be the foundation of something extraordinary. Don't let their doubt kill your fire. Let it ignite you instead, because at the end of the day, the sweetest revenge isn't watching them fail. It's watching yourself soar. And trust me, when you finally rise above, their laughter will be nothing but an echo in the distance. Years later, I returned to my old high school to deliver a keynote at their annual career day. Standing in the same auditorium where my classmates once laughed at me felt surreal. I wore one of my best designs, a statement necklace symbolizing resilience, and I carried myself with the confidence that only experience grants. As I shared my story, I watched students' eyes widen. Some looked inspired, others emotional, but none laughed. When I finished, the applause shook the room, echoing louder than the ridicule that once haunted me. That moment wasn't just victory, it was closure. I had transformed humiliation into empowerment, not just for myself, but for every student sitting in those seats. My revenge had come full circle, and it was far more powerful than I ever imagined. After the speech, a young girl approached me shyly, clutching a sketchbook. "They say my drawings are silly," she whispered. I smiled warmly and told her, "They said my jewelry was useless too. Don't let them stop you." Her smile grew, and I saw myself reflected in her eyes. That was when I realized the true legacy of my journey. It wasn't the boutiques, the revenue, or the accolades. It was moments like this. Every person I inspired to keep chasing their passion was proof that my story mattered. Revenge had started as something personal, a weapon against mockery. But now it was bigger. It was a movement, a ripple effect that encouraged others to silence doubt with action. That was worth more than every dollar I had ever earned. The brand grew far beyond what I initially dreamed. International flagship stores opened, collaborations with fashion houses rolled out, and my products graced red carpets. But I never forgot the shoeboxes under my bed or the cafe counter where my first customer noticed my necklace. Those humble beginnings grounded me, reminding me that success without gratitude is hollow. Melissa faded into obscurity, her bitterness consuming her, while my name continued to rise. Sometimes I wondered if she regretted mocking me, but I no longer cared. My life wasn't defined by her jealousy. It was defined by resilience, creativity, and the courage to pursue what others dismissed. The ultimate revenge wasn't her downfall. It was my unstoppable ascent, and in every milestone, I felt a peace that mockery could never touch. Daniel and I eventually started a family, raising our children with the lessons we had learned. We taught them that no dream was too small, no passion too silly, no idea too impossible. Watching their little hands sketch and build filled me with joy, because I knew they would never carry the same scars I had. They would grow up in a home where creativity was celebrated, not ridiculed. And that, perhaps, was the greatest revenge of all, breaking the cycle of doubt. Melissa might have laughed at me, but my children would never laugh at themselves. They would chase their passions without fear, knowing that resilience mattered more than approval. My empire wasn't just for me anymore. It was for them, and for every generation after, to dream without limits. The older I became, the more I understood that revenge is fleeting, but transformation is eternal. At first, every milestone felt like a dagger aimed at my doubters. But as time passed, I realized they no longer occupied space in my story. My victories weren't about silencing them anymore. They were about amplifying myself. The empire I had built wasn't rooted in spite, it was rooted in strength. I had taken the cruelest moments of my life and turned them into stepping stones. And while Melissa remained trapped in resentment, I was free. Free to create, free to inspire, free to live fully. That freedom was priceless. It was proof that the laughter of others cannot destroy you unless you let it. And I had chosen not to let it. Eventually, I wrote a book about my journey, detailing the transformation from a mocked dreamer to a self-made millionaire. Writing was cathartic, forcing me to revisit painful chapters and celebrate triumphant ones. The book became a bestseller, reaching readers who had never even touched my jewelry. Emails poured in from people thanking me for validating their dreams. My story was no longer just mine, it was universal. Every page echoed with resilience, reminding readers that passion, no matter how small, deserves pursuit. When I held the first printed copy in my hands, I felt tears sting my eyes. The girl once laughed off stage had now written her own narrative. My book wasn't just a story of revenge, it was a manifesto of hope. And sharing it completed the circle of empowerment. Looking back, I sometimes wondered how different my life would be if people had supported me from the beginning. Would I still have built an empire without their mockery? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing was certain, their cruelty forged me into steel. Without those sneers, I might not have discovered the fire inside me. Pain shaped me, but it didn't define me. It refined me. I was no longer just Emily, the girl with a useless hobby. I was Emily Carter, entrepreneur, creator, mother, and mentor. And though Melissa would forever be a footnote in my story, she was also the catalyst. She taught me that betrayal and mockery can either break you or build you. And I chose to build. That choice became the cornerstone of my empire. Today, when I walk into one of my boutiques, I no longer think of the laughter or the insults. I think of the customers smiling as they slip on a necklace, the employees thriving under my leadership, the students finding courage because of my story. I think of the ripple effect that started with a craft table and a girl no one believed in. That ripple had become a wave, touching lives far beyond my own. Melissa's laughter, once so piercing, had become irrelevant background noise. My revenge wasn't about her anymore. It was about rewriting my story so boldly that her chapter barely registered. And as I stand surrounded by beauty, resilience, and love, I know one truth. The best revenge isn't just success. It's creating a life you love. The empire continues to grow, but my definition of success has shifted. It's no longer about headlines, revenue, or proving people wrong. It's about the quiet moments, mentoring a young dreamer, seeing my children embrace creativity, watching employees find purpose in their work. Those moments remind me why I kept going when everyone said I should stop. They remind me that resilience is contagious, that belief in yourself can ignite belief in others. Melissa might never admit her cruelty, but it doesn't matter anymore. Her role in my story ended years ago. My life is proof that mockery cannot define destiny. And every time someone tells me their passion is useless, I smile and say, so was mine, until it wasn't. Because that truth is the most powerful revenge of all. And so, that's my story. From being the girl mocked for wasting time on a useless hobby to becoming the woman who built a multi-million-dollar empire. My journey began with laughter and doubt, but it ended with freedom, resilience, and legacy. If you take anything from this, let it be this: the world will always try to silence dreamers, but your voice matters. Let their ridicule be your reason to keep going. Let every sneer become fuel, every insult a stepping stone. Because one day, you'll look back at the people who doubted you, and you won't feel anger. You'll feel gratitude. Gratitude that they pushed you to prove them wrong. And when you finally rise, your success will echo louder than their laughter ever did. That, my friends, is the sweetest revenge.